Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Truly Scottish TV News with me, Gordon Ross, from the Indycar. Today I'm in Bearsden. The sun is shining. It's a busy day here. A lot of people parked up having their lunch. This morning we woke up to the news that there had been a breakthrough in the Brexit negotiations, with the United Kingdom finally being able to move on from what's known as the divorce settlement to the substantive negotiations about a trade deal. During the morning, about 5 o'clock in the morning actually, when Theresa May and Michel Barnier from the EU came out to announce to the world that they had struck a deal. The United Kingdom and the European Union have agreed to something called, what was it they were calling it, regulatory, no, convergence, it's got a strange name, equivalence, that's it, regulatory equivalence. Now, this is a kind of form of words which is probably meaningless to most normal people, most everyday people, never heard of this. Regulatory equivalence, well, if you look at the two words, what do they mean? Well, regulatory means rules, doesn't it? It means the regulations that govern whatever it is you're doing. Equivalence effectively means what is the equal of something. So if you have regulatory equivalence in two parts of the world, it means that the regulations which govern those two places are similar. They're not absolutely the same, but they're similar enough that those two places can do business with each other. And this is what has broken the deadlock in the negotiations for Brexit. Previously, the UK had discussed the idea of allowing the Northern Ireland to have a little bit more leeway in how it dealt with its near neighbours in the Republic, which of course is in the European Union, in an effort to keep a fixed border off the table completely. So there would be no hard border, no checkpoints, and trade would be able to move freely. The Democratic Unionist Party rejected this because they felt that it would be the thin end of the wedge coming. It would be treating Northern Ireland differently. It would begin to separate a little bit from the United Kingdom, and it would have different rules from the UK. And the DUP were very concerned that that would be the beginnings of Northern Ireland breaking away from the United Kingdom, which of course they don't want. However, the crisis has been averted now by changing the form of words so that it now contains a balance between the United Kingdom as a whole, including Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England. All of the United Kingdom is now going to keep its regulatory framework similar enough to the European Union's regulatory framework that the two nations can trade together. Now, it should be pointed out at this point that this kind of regulatory balancing act is not normally used for physical things like trucks and pallets of goods going to and from countries. What it's normally used in relation to is banking transactions and banking investments. It's a way in which the banking systems of different nations are similar enough that they can trade with each other without significant difficulties. It's not being done to make it practically smoother for truckloads of goods to go to and from Northern or Southern Ireland, or even across through the tunnel or on ferries to Europe. Nothing to do with that. It is simply to do with banking. Now, in this kind of regulatory balancing act, or equivalence as it's known, instead of being in a banking union or in a customs union where the rules are exactly the same on both sides, and therefore everybody is working to exactly the same regulations and rules, so there is no paperwork. You can flow services from one place to another, from one bank in one country to another bank in another country, seamlessly in seconds, without any interruptions, without any recalculations. It's not been applied to physical trading before. Now, this is an important fact. When you're listening to the television news today and you're hearing this saying that there's not going to be any hard border, well, there isn't actually going to be a wall, but there is going to have to be some physical checks and balances on the goods and the trucks and the other transport arrangements for goods which are travelling to and from places into and out of Ireland, into and out of the UK and the European Union. So this business of there being a balance between the regulations on one side of the channel and the regulations in the UK has never been applied to a reality situation like actually making goods and taking them to another place and selling them, or selling livestock or selling farm produce. These things have just not been done in that way before. So no matter what they're telling us today, and it is kind of good news, it's progress of a sort, what will happen is that regulatory framework, that balance, is going to have to be written into international law, because under existing laws, regulatory balance like this is only subject to notice of 30 days. That means you could sign an agreement with a bank in Lausanne in Switzerland or wherever it is, but somewhere else, and that actual regulatory framework, that agreement that you've just struck, could be terminated after a month. So there is not the usual permanent underpinnings of international law attached to this kind of regulatory agreement. So it's new territory for the European Union, and it's very new territory for the British government, because nobody has ever had to do this before in such a way. So despite it breaking a logjam in terms of the talks, it now creates new difficulties, because this equivalence, as they call it, this regulatory equivalence, is going to have to be transferred not just from the banking sector, but into the business sector itself, and into the physical world where goods and services, stuff, foods, commodities are transported around from one country to another in exchange for money. The money part of it will work because the equivalence is designed to deal with the cash transactions. That's fine. But what happens about things like checking what's on board the truck? What about the safety of the food that's going from one place to another, or the welfare of the animals, the standard of the products being sold, the safety of the products being sold? All of these sorts of things still would need to be checked. What's going in and out will still have to go through weigh bridges. People will still have to sign paperwork. There might be more paperwork than before because the system is not seamless. The system is two systems, basically, which are competing across the border with each other, but they are different. And remember, with equivalence, the UK or the EU can make completely different banking arrangements. They can alter the rules on their side if they wish, so can the UK, and the system can get out of step at any moment, at any time, unless it's written into international law that that is not going to happen. So the problem with this equivalence system is it's never been used in this way before. The banking industry in London, they will be absolutely cock-a-hoop about this because it's going to make their lives much easier. But for you and I, average everyday people, is it going to make any difference to us? Well, might do, because it might mean that some goods are going to be held up in customs. Some goods might need to be inspected more often, because the regulations in other countries might have changed, even though they have this regulatory equivalence framework. It's not an exact fit. And because it's not an exact fit, and countries can change their regulatory arrangements themselves, it means that that regulatory framework needs to be re-examined year upon year and adjusted constantly to cope with the changes from both sides. So it's not a simple fix. It's a way of fixing it, and it's a way of presenting it to the public as a done deal, that somehow all the problems have gone away. But actually the only problem that's gone away is the banking problem. The physical problem of getting goods into and out of countries is still going to have to be done. And not only is it going to have to be done, it's going to have to be done at both ends of the chain, because with two different systems, even if they do overlap a little bit, they're not exactly the same. And therefore, when you send goods from one country to another, there's going to be one system here and one system at the other end. There's still going to need to be a customs check. There's going to need to be checks of the weights of the truck, that the cargo is what they say it is, that it has a certain value, that value hasn't changed and that the rules that govern its manufacturing haven't changed to the point where it would make it illegal to sell it in this new country. So you see where I'm going with this. This is quite a complicated business. So in short, the Brexit negotiations have been unstuck by this form of words. It's pleased the DUP because they've got what they want. They've got the United Kingdom integrity secure. It means Northern Ireland is not going to become part of Greater Ireland. The Irish president has said that nobody in Northern Ireland will be forced into a reunification against their will. It's not going to happen unless they asked for it. So nobody's going to be forced to do anything. Nobody will have to change their passports. Everybody will retain their existing rights as both European citizens, British citizens and Irish citizens. So effectively what's happened is everybody has agreed to just leave everything alone. And they've come up with a form of words which releases the banking industry in the UK and Europe from the problems of passporting, which were going to disappear, which was how we usually run our banking industry. So effectively, the banking industry has now got a new problem. It's got to write out new agreements based on this regulatory equivalence, as they call it, this balancing of regulations in the banking industries in different countries. The rest of the industries are going to have to come to grips with how the new border systems are going to work, because there will still need to be checks, even without border posts. You know, at the beginning and end of a journey, there needs to be some kind of interchange, some kind of hub, some import and export hub, if you want to call it that, where customs and excise checks can be made, even though there isn't any border. Those trucks crossing the border would need to go to one of these hubs to have their cargoes checked, to check the paperwork's correct, and to ensure that everything's legal and they're not smuggling anything. The amount of possibility for smuggling in this arrangement is going to skyrocket, because you're going from one big jurisdiction, i.e. the EU, and all of its simple rules, to all sorts of different sets of rules in different places, with different people doing different checks to different standards. So again, we come back to this problem of equivalence. You know, you can't be equivalent in everything, so there will be problems with it. From here on in, the next problem is going to be writing the agreement which sets this equivalence into concrete rules. In other words, the agreement has to somehow become fixed so that the terms and the length of this agreement is set out as an ongoing rolling agreement, which is not going to be revoked after 30 days. Because at the moment, the legal underpinnings for regulatory equivalence don't go far enough to deal with an entire nation or an entire continent. They're just not built for that sort of thing. They're built to deal with banking industries only. So all of that needs to be changed. The lawyers are going to have to do their work on it. The interesting thing now is what the final trade deal is going to look like. How much more compromise will the Europeans be prepared to make? I think, this is my own opinion, is that the Europeans have actually gone out of their way to allow the UK to have this moment, this little success, this little victory, because they know, politically, that Theresa May, her popularity was at a very low ebb, and there was a danger of there being another election if she became even more unpopular and failed to get through this window of opportunity to get to the next stage. And so they've given Theresa May this victory, and they are praising her up to the rafters, building up and bigging up the UK Prime Minister to bolster her popularity for the next and the most difficult part of the negotiations. It's taken 18 months to do the easy one. The simple 3 things that the UK had to do has taken them 18 months to achieve. And that is just saying that they'll guarantee the rights of people who are Europeans, that they will make sure there's no Irish border, and that they will pay what they were due to pay anyway into the European Union. 18 months to do those 3 things. Now imagine, multiply the difficulty factor of that by about 100, and that's where you are when it comes to actually negotiating a trade deal. Because you've got to get this equivalence right for the banking sector, and then you've got to deal with each individual sector of business that operates across the borders of Europe. So that's going to be imports and exports, livestock, farm produce, electronics, cars, everything that's manufactured and bought and sold in the physical real world rather than the money world is going to have to be legislated for. That's going to take hundreds and hundreds of people to write the rules for that. And can they do that in 15 months? Well, it's anybody's guess, but they'll probably put together the outline of the agreement, at least, I would hope, by the winter of next year. So in a year's time, you would hope to know the broad brushstrokes of what Brexit is going to look like. The difficulty is, and I mentioned this in an earlier post this morning, is that the European Union cannot be seen to give the United Kingdom everything that it currently has as an EU member at the same price, because if it does that, then the rest of the countries in the EU will wonder why they're even members, because if it's better to be out of the EU and cheaper to trade with the EU from outside of it, everybody will just leave the EU and it would fall to pieces. And the structural integrity of the European Union is far more important to the people on the continent than it is to us. The British government thinks that the integrity of the United Kingdom is paramount. Well, it is to them. But in the larger world, the European Union is far, far more important than the UK. And therefore, they're not going to give us a better deal than we've got now. So no matter what the Tories say about not signing any deal that's bad for Britain, and if it's a bad deal, they'll walk away, that's all bluff. They can't do that. If they walk away, they would cripple the economy, and everybody knows this, so that's just not going to happen. But what will happen is Europe will do a deal where Britain gets to still trade, maybe in the free market. Maybe it gets access to the European free market, but it will be at a price. It's not going to cost the same as it does now. It will cost more so that we can be seen to be not better off outside the EU. It's not going to be as high, perhaps, as the World Trade Organization tariffs, but it will be higher than we're paying now. And Britain will have to accept it. And it will have to accept it because there's no other option. It either cancels Brexit altogether and stays in the EU and keeps everything that we've got intact, or it goes for the trade deal that's offered, because there's only going to be one deal. They're not going to offer two, and they're not going to better it. It will be a take it or leave it, once in a lifetime chance. And the UK is going to have to decide whether it wants to leave the EU and spend more money trading from outside, or stay in and spend less money trading from within. Because those are the two choices. There isn't anything else. They've now passed the first hurdle, and now the difficult part begins. By the end of 2018, in Scotland, we would hope to know what the full ramifications of Brexit are going to be, and what it's going to cost the Scottish economy in both jobs and loss of earnings and loss of foreign currency earnings, which is the key thing in the Scottish economy. Remember, oil is no longer the issue in the Scottish economy. What is the most important thing to Scotland in the future is its export earnings. We have a balance of payments which is positive. We earned £2 billion last year in surplus foreign currency earnings. Now that's money that goes in to, at the moment, goes into the UK coffers, but if Scotland were independent, would go into its central bank, which would actually increase the value of its currency and be there to be used by the Scottish Government for the good of the people. But at the moment, it's being shared out with 55 million other people in the neighbouring country, whereas if we're independent, we can use it ourselves. So we have a choice to make. Is Brexit going to be good enough for Scots to thole it or to suffer it? Or is it going to be much more attractive for us to go it alone with everything that we've got at our disposal, with our successful exporting economy to support us? Oil, believe it or not, is not the issue in this next referendum. The issue in the next referendum is preserving what we have and growing our export economy even more. We've got a burgeoning energy sector for renewable energy, which is just at the beginning. It has the potential to grow to 5 or 10 times the size it is now. It's going to become one of the biggest and most important industries in Scottish history, bigger even than shipbuilding or steel making. It is going to become the whole future cash cow of the Scottish economy. But we can't do it if we are shackled to the UK and it's draining us of all the earnings that we're making from foreign currency. If we start to export energy in the quantities that we know we can do, then we will make a great deal of money for the Scottish economy and be able to share that out amongst all of the people in Scotland, especially those who need the support at the moment. So the choice will be clear in 2018, perhaps September, October, when we do have the referendum date finally set. We will have the opportunity to decide whether we want to go down with the Brexit ship and take the hit and suffer the consequences of the stupidity of somebody else's decision, or whether we want to take our own future into our own hands and say, we've got our own economy, thank you very much. We don't need Brexit and we don't want it. We're quite happy to do our own thing, and if we are independent, we can also have another vote about how we relate to the European Union and how we trade with it. We might discover we can negotiate an even better EU deal than we have now. In fact, I'm pretty sure we could. And I'm almost certain that the European Union would actually sweeten the deal for us as well, because they don't want to lose the part of the British Isles, which at the moment has the greatest potential for earning, for generating power, and for producing food and fish and whisky, all of the things that Scotland is famous for. The Europeans would love to have that in their free market, and they would be, I'm sure, extremely interested in bringing Scotland back in with better terms than it has now. Anyway, that's the end of this edition of Truly Scottish News and my piece of analysis. I hope you found the information on regulatory equivalence useful to you. There is more on regulatory equivalence available online. You might want to look at the Financial Times in particular. They explain the whole notion of it very, very easily in easily understood language. But it is at the moment an untried solution to the problems of trading with Europe. It only deals with banking, and we need to bring this equivalence idea into the real world, the world of real people and real things and real trade. At the moment, we just don't know. Anyway, I'll leave you with those interesting thoughts, and as usual, if you have any comments to make about Truly Independent News and Indycar programmes as well, please contact me after the show in the usual way on Facebook, or you can email me as well. The details are on my Facebook page. I'll see you next week. I hope you have a good weekend, and that's the end of the show for today. Bye for now.